From Microbe TV, this is TWiP, This Week in Parasitism, episode 229, recorded on February 9th, 2024. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and joining me today from Fort Lee, New Jersey, Dixon Despommier.
Hello, Vincent, and everybody else. The sun is going down, but it hasn't gone down completely yet. It was a lovely day today. It was actually in the, I believe, high 50s Fahrenheit, and no wind. And but it's February. This is a very, very odd beginning to the year.
Here in New York, Dixon, it is 9 degrees. It went down 2 since we started TWiP 2 hours ago.
Oh, you've already done a weather report. Sorry.
Well, we had a TWiP beforehand, so.
It's okay. Yeah, we did it, and it went down 2 degrees. Also joining us from New York, Daniel Griffin.
Hello, everyone.
And from Glasgow, Scotland, Christina Naula.
Evening all. It's good to be here.
And our guest returning for a second episode from Tel Aviv University, which of course is in Israel. Eyal, welcome back.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to be back.
What time is it there? Is it like midnight?
It is 1:30 midnight.
Well, thank you for staying up. I know you would be asleep by now, right?
Probably. It's a good opportunity to wish happy new Chinese year for our Chinese listeners. So just got back from Chinese New Year dinner with my family. I have a Chinese sister-in-law, so it's even more difficult with a full belly to stay up. Manage.
What's the weather like now in Tel Aviv? Is it nice, warm weather?
It's nice. It's, cold in Israel terms, so it's about 9 or 10 degrees Celsius. Skies are clear, and we've had a rainy 2 weeks, but the sun is out the last couple of days.
Yeah, the same temperature here as in New York, 9 degrees Celsius. How about that? If you enjoy our programs, we would love to have your financial support to help run them. Your donations are U.S. federal tax deductible, and you can go to microbe.tv/contribute to find out the various ways that you can assist us. Daniel, what do we have this week?
Well, for those tuning in for the first time, those tuning back in, I'm going to hand this off to Eyal to remind or hear for the first time our mystery case.
Yeah, so this was a 20-year-old female who presented with intermittent fever up to 39.5 Celsius. She had headache, right upper quadrant abdominal pain. Her symptoms began 10 weeks after she returned from a 2-month trip to Southeast Asia. She had visited Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, Indonesia, Bali, and Sri Lanka, returning to Israel via Denmark. Prior to travel, she was vaccinated as recommended. During her trip, she did not camp out, and she denies any exposure to fresh water, but did swim in hotel swimming pool in Thailand and in seawaters in Thailand and Indonesia. She denies consumption of raw meat, fish, or unpasteurized milk products. During the trip, she ate local street food and salads and suffered a brief episode of diarrhea during her stay in Vietnam. Her physical examination is unremarkable. Initial lab workup revealed eosinophilia of 2,700 per microliter. That was 24% of her white cell count. Mild anemia, hemoglobin of 10.7 grams per deciliter, mild thrombocytosis, 485,000 per microliter, alkaline phosphatase 164, that's elevated, gamma GT 60, and LDH 445, also mildly elevated. Repeated thick and thin blood smears were negative for malaria. Toxocara serology is negative. A contrast-enhanced abdominal CT revealed several clustered hypodense lesions with ring enhancement in the liver, retroperitoneal lymphadenopathy, mild ascites, and right pleural effusion. Due to continued symptoms and fever, abdominal CTs repeated 2 weeks later and revealed lesion progression and hypodense track marks. That was our patient.
Okay,
right.
well, it looks like we've got some guesses. Shall I start us off, Vincent?
Please, Daniel.
All right. Eyal, no relation, writes. I didn't know that was such a common name, but apparently, dear TWiP professors, Happy New Year from the land down under, where the weather is hot and vacation is over. First, I would like to say that episode 227 was fascinating indeed. Alpha-gal syndrome, colloquially called red meat allergy here, is a very big problem here in Australia, and not only in the U.S., because especially when red meat is more of a religion than a diet here in Australia. Basically, due to the very outdoorsy mentality here in Australia, half of the people are at risk of developing mammalian meat allergy, MMA. It's bad enough that kids are taught to never pull out a tick, but instead to either freeze them off or use an anti-tick cream. Well, at least ticks don't hurt you as quickly as saltwater crocs, or the blue ring octopus, or the cone-shaped snail, or the brown snake, or the tapir, or the sharks, or mostly everything on this continent. And then he gives us a reference there. Now, we're going to get a nice differential here. For the case of the 20-year-old Israeli female, I will go out on a limb and say amoebiasis. For a differential, I looked at all parasites I could find that are typical of Southeast Asia, and look for those that would cause abdominal pain, almost all, headache and fever, most of them, and would show up in liver CT. And here's a quick summary of my assessment. Hookworm, Giardia, Strongyloides, Hymenalepsis nana, the dwarf tapeworm, trichinolosis, capillariasis, Angiostrongyliasis, Ascaris, Trichuris, Enterobius, the pinworm, Cryptosporidium, Entamoeba, Blastocystis. Based upon the above assessment, the best fit is Entamoeba, as always, eagerly waiting for the TWiP, Eyal.
Thank you. All right. Christina, can you take the next one?
Yep. Sarah writes, hello TWiP team, writing to you from snowy Philadelphia. I'm a recent ID fellow, new ID faculty, and relatively recent listener. Wish I knew about TWiP during fellowship. Here goes my first guess at a case. For the returning traveller from Southeast Asia with fever, liver lesions, and eosinophilia, 10 weeks after travel, a few things came to my mind for a differential. First, I considered amoebic liver abscess caused by Entamoeba histolytica. The incubation period would be correct, but a few things don't fit. Primarily, I believe this is less often associated with eosinophilia, and some of the imaging findings were not consistent. Second, I considered liver flukes. She was traveling in areas where Clonorchis and Opistorchis are endemic, and the clinical scenario could potentially fit with these. However, it was stated that she didn't eat any fish. She did eat local street food, so perhaps there was some fish consumed unknowingly. One thing that stands out in the case is the radiographic finding of track marks in the CT. This makes me think of fascioliasis, such as with fasciola hepatica or fasciola gigantica, which migrate through the liver parenchyma. This is acquired by eating aquatic vegetation, classically watercress, a common salad ingredient. So overall, I think fascioliasis is my best guess. A stool O and P exam or several may be of use here. Cheers, Sarah.
Dixon.
Hawken writes, hello from cloudy Athens, a tad brisk at 15 degrees F when I got up. This week's case was quite interesting, as given our history of eating salads and street food in Southeast Asia, It seems like it could be a myriad of things. Given the liver involvement, I originally went with schistosomes, but later I put it lower on my list based on her only swimming in chlorinated pools. The famous Ascaris suis case came to mind with the salad tidbit, but ultimately the liver lesions described seemed less likely to be migrating ascarids than trematodes. Ultimately, thinking back to a recent ProMed email where there were major case numbers in parts of Russia with tourists eating street food consisting of salted fish and developed chlornorchis, that was ultimately where I decided to cast my suspicions, especially given its prevalence in parts of Asia. Thanks for another interesting case. Best, Hakon.
Hawking.
Hawken.
Like hawking your goods on the street,
Hawken.
Dixon.
Hawken.
Hawking.
I've
We got to
never
tell
done
people
that.
to start putting in the phonetics again.
Yeah.
Or the fanatics again.
All right, Margaret writes, hello, no need to check the weather. It's winter in the Willamette Valley, so it's 45, 55 F and drizzling. Thank you for all that you do. So excited to submit a guess for the case report on TWiP 227. I think that's not the right one, is it?
Well, I think she did the last one, so she's likening that experience to being
I
on
see.
a game show for introverts.
Yeah, it's like being on a game show, but for introverts. All right. So her guest today is fascioliasis due to fasciola hepatica. Eosinophilia is similar. The range reported in Saba et al. 2004, human fascioliasis. Thank you for the references in your free online textbook. Linear tracts in the liver are consistent with this organism, and right-sided pleural effusion has been reported as well. It's too soon to see eggs in the stool, so circulating antigen testing is probably the next step to confirm. But I have questions that I don't have time to answer this week. Can you get triclobendazole in Israel? If you can, but you can't get the serology, does this drug cover differential diagnoses with acceptable risks to the patient? Looks like nitoxinide is a distant second choice, but what would that mean for the patient? Would they have more side effects from more extended treatment? Would they be ill for a longer period of time? We should come back to those when we're finished with the all the emails, right? Can't wait for the next episode. Margaret in Oregon. P.S. The patient didn't think she had freshwater exposure, but some of her salads did.
Excellent.
Daniel, you're back to you.
Oh, I think Christina, did you go yet?
Christina's muted.
You're muted there. Maybe
Yep.
she's been reading all along.
No. I did read one, but Eyal did not yet.
Yeah, yes. Sorry about that. You're
I have
next.
Justin. Justin writes, hello all. The case details made me think of schistosomiasis. However, she denies any swimming in fresh water. Perhaps the pool was sufficient source if water were undertreated. Another potential I thought of would be opisthorhis, but she denies fish consumption, making that unlikely. And so my guess this time will be schistosomiasis. Thanks for a wonderful podcast, as always, yours, Justin.
All right. Felix writes, dear hosts, greetings from snowy Germany. Amoebiasis would fit the symptoms quite well, but the elevated eosinophils lead me more towards liver fluke or an ascaris. My final answer is fasciola infection, since she might have enjoyed some seagrass in her salad. Thanks for the great podcast, Felix.
We are back to Dixon, right? Dixon's muted.
Now, Dixon is now unmuted. Inga writes, dear professors of TWiP, it's an overcast day with an unparticular average of 9 degrees Celsius in the Netherlands. As unexcited as the weather, all the more exciting the case has me, because it reminds me of a patient I treated in my year as a junior doctor, in which I suspected a parasite caused by her liver abscess, but sadly it proved not to be so. The case you presented is of a 20-year-old traveler to Southeast Asia with hypodense liver lesions with ring enhancement, RUQ
Right
abdominal
upper
pain.
quadrant.
Thank you, doctor. Uh, and intermittent high fever. The liver lesions described immediately make me think of an abscess. Intermittent high fever would fit with this quite well. Multiple parasites could cause this. For example, Entamoeba histolytica, Gonococcus species, Fasciola species, Toxoplasmosis, and schistosomiasis. Knowing that our patient avoided swimming in fresh water makes schistosomiasis and Fasciola less likely. Knowing she avoided raw and undercooked meats, is suspected to have an adequate immune system, makes toxoplasmosis less likely. This makes me think of either an amoebic abscess or a gonococcosis. The first being more likely to cause fevers and being more prevalent in Southeast Asia would be my guess. It would also explain an early episode of diarrhea. The distinction between the two may be important, as in the case of an amoebic abscess. One may aspirate the X abscess, and in a gonococcosis, this is contraindicated. Confirming the diagnosis could be done with stool antigen tests or stool microscopy, as well as serodiagnosis. Treatment for Entamoeba histolytica would be recommended with metronidazole. Looking forward to learning more about parasitology every time. Kind regards, Inga.
Christina.
Jay writes, Dear Twipsters, a 20-year-old female was in her otherwise good state of health until she developed fever to 39.3 degrees Celsius, headache and right upper quadrant pain about 10 weeks after returning from a 2-month trip to Southeast and South Asia. She ate street food and salads while traveling, but avoided swimming in fresh water. Labs showed a high eosinophil count, mild anemia, and mildly elevated liver enzymes. A CT scan was done showing several clustered hypodense lesions with ring enhancement, retroperitoneal lymphadenopathy, and the right pleural effusions. Her symptoms persisted, so a CT scan was repeated 2 weeks later. The liver lesions progressed and now showed hypodense track marks. I suspect this is fascioliasis due to the liver fluke Fasciola gigantica found in the areas of the world where she had travelled, or Fasciola hepatica, found throughout the temperate world. Herbivorous animals such as sheep and goats, or goats, are the definitive hosts for this parasitic trematode. The animals release the eggs into the environment when they defecate. The eggs embryonate in fresh water, infect snails, the intermediate host, and undergo several developmental stages within the snail. Those stages eventually lead to an encysted form called the metacercariae. The metacercariae attach to the leaves of aquatic plants such as watercress and water lettuce and are then eaten by humans, including our 20-year-old salad-eating world traveler. She then became the incidental host. Roughly 6 to 12 weeks later, the acute phase of infection begins, manifesting as fever, right upper quadrant pain, and marked eosinophilia. The hypodense tortuous tracts seen on the second CT scan are caused by migration of the fluke through the liver. Diagnosis can be confirmed by liver biopsy or direct observation of the flatworm through ERCP. Serology can also be useful for making the diagnosis as well as tracking response to therapy. Eggs are not yet released into the stool in the acute phase, so stool studies will not help with the diagnosis at this time. Treatment is usually with triclobendazole. It's fun and helpful to cast a wide net when thinking about other possible causes of her symptoms. Toxocara and malaria were considered but were negative. Other parasitic and non-parasitic causes are possible. Sexual history was left out of the case description, but hopefully it was obtained. Right upper quadrant pain and fevers can be seen in the perihepatitis or the Fitzhugh-Curtis syndrome. And never forget the great mimicker, syphilis.
Hmm.
It can also lead to fever and the lytic jaundice, aka syphilitic hepatitis. Thank you for this most interesting and challenging case, Twipsters. Please keep them coming. Jay.
I think Eyal can take that last one now.
So Michelle and Alexander writes, Dear believers in science, the, the 20-year-old patient returned from a trip to South Asia presents with a number of different symptoms and signs. By prioritizing the signs which are most specific, we can quickly come to a diagnosis. While eosinophilia, fever, and elevated liver tests point toward a parasitic infection of the liver, this still leaves a large number of possible etiologies to test for, from schistosoma to echinococcus, and from Strongylor to Toxocara. The findings of the CT of liver help narrow the differential down considerably. While a number of infections can cause ring-enhancing lesions, the tracks seen in this case are indicative of only one helminthic infection, fasciolosis. This infection is most commonly caused by trematode Fasciola hepatica, which is endemic in Southeast Asia and other parts of the world. The infection is acquired by eating uncooked water plants like watercress and morning glory, which harbor the parasite. The worm migrates out of the gut into the liver, where the immature worm can cause the track marks described in this case by feeding on the liver. Foie gras dom. Later on, the adult worms reside in the biliary tract, where they can cause chronic inflammation or obstruction. The species Fasciola gigantica can also cause the disease and can often only be distinguished with nucleic acid amplification tests. Symptoms in patients with Fasciola hepatica infection can include abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, and jaundice. Although the diagnosis can be tricky, antibody detection via serological testing, stool examination, ultrasound of the liver, and CT scan of the abdomen can be helpful. Stool examinations tend to be negative until the parasite has reached the biliary system. Commonly seen findings on ultrasound in later stages of the disease may include hepatomegaly, widened biliary ducts caused by inflammation, and if you're lucky, live fluke movement through said ducts. On CT scan, hypodense lesions in the liver and periportal tracking strongly suggest Fasciola hepatica infection. The primary treatment for fascioliasis is the anti-helminthic drug triclabendazole, which is effective against the mature and immature flukes and usually given in 2 oral doses 12 hours apart. If necessary, medications to treat concomitant symptoms such as pain and inflammation may be prescribed as well. Thank you for this great case. All the best. Michelle and Alexander from First Vienna Parasitology Passion Club.
All right, that does it for our guesses for today.
I think we have a few more people that might want to guess. Dixon, Christina, Vincent, anyone want to go first?
I am going to admit to having cheated and actually already presented my diagnosis to Eyal a couple of weeks ago. So I think I'm going to exclude myself because that would not be, it would be cheating, wouldn't it?
Dixon, shall we go to you? What are you thinking?
If you wish, sure, I'll be happy to volunteer. This is a clear-cut case of Fasciola hepatica, period. There's no relationship for Entamoeba histolytica because it doesn't form these tracts, for instance, and it's not usually associated with any acidophilia. The epidemiology is perfect. She only ate vegetables, fresh salads. That would expose her to the Metasaccarium, which she should have sort of then ingested, and the parasitic infection then proceeded from there. And it takes about 10 weeks for this thing to mature, maybe even a little bit longer than that. I like their reference to the textbook. Vincent, you gave a smile when they got to foie gras d'homme.
Oh, that was so funny.
That is my addition to the textbook. So that means they've read the textbook. I actually got away with something, and they left it in.
We've still left that in, Dixon.
Still, you're going to leave it in until I'm not here anymore. How's that? So I think this was an excellent description that they've made, and I salute them. This group has come a long way. They started out knowing nothing, and now they know a lot. And we receive a lot of good emails from this group.
All right, Vincent, what are you thinking? Are you the same page with Dixon?
So I was originally on a different page because we have, so these countries, salads and fish,
Yeah.
this is all consistent, and ring enhancing lesions, right upper quadrant pain,
Yeah.
could be gnathostomiasis. But the
Ah,
tracks are the ones that distinguish it,
that's
right?
right.
So
That's right.
I want it to be different from everyone else, but
You are already. You don't have to
at least
try.
at least I have a differential there. But it's clearly the tracks make it fasciola. Yeah. It's very cool.
All right. Well, I have some thoughts, some comments. So yeah, I liked a lot of the email guesses. Right. I don't actually know the answer. I like this. This is I get to go out there and potentially embarrass myself in public, which I was taught during my medical training is the only way to truly learn. So yeah, so it is a very compelling story for fasciola hepatica, right? The CT showing the hypodense track marks, the right upper quadrant pain, the eosinophilia. Really, a lot of this makes sense. And actually, I like the fact that repeated thick and thin blood smears are negative for malaria. That's something we've basically sort of tried to reinforce. Fever in the returning traveler is malaria till proven otherwise, and here they proved it otherwise. I like the toxocare serology is negative because we see eosinophilia, so we are thinking of a tissue invasive helminth parasitic infection. There were a couple things that I sort of made me kind of have a couple second thoughts. So, one was going through the ring enhanced lesions in the liver, right? Not always something typical. So I'm sort of trying to think in my mind, am I just going to whip out the triclobendazole? Am I just going to do the diagnostic testing for the fasciola? Or am I worried that we're actually getting some pyogenic abscesses, right? We've got, and I like to think about the life cycle here, right? So that maybe this is a good chance. So some of our people brought this up. So you ingest the infectious form, the metacercaria from the watercress. What a dangerous thing to travel the world as a salad eater. I like to only eat meat and cooked vegetables, mostly meat, preferably
Right.
deep fried. But okay, so they go ahead thinking they're being healthy. They eat that good salad. They get the metacercaria. The metacercaria hatch in the small intestine, and then I think it's important to think there's a certain amount of time because now the larvae they're going to hatch, right, and the larvae are going to penetrate the small intestine, enter through Gleason's capsule, and they're going to start to actually, get larger and eat their way through that liver. And as you're eating that way through the liver, there's a certain potential for communication between the biliary system, where there are a lot of bacteria, and the parenchyma of the liver. The next thing, which I thought was really important, so I'm still saying I'm not sure, do I have to cover? Do I need blood cultures? Am I worried about, something, sort of a little more than just a couple doses of triclobendazole, is the diagnostics. And I like the fact that people brought this up. Timing's everything, right? So early on, you're not going to have the mature adults in the biliary system, right? They're migrating through the parenchyma of the liver. So little early to go with that invasive ERCP. Also, a little early to be looking at stool for the ova in this case.
Right.
But really, the ideal time to start be thinking about serum for serology and antigen. And actually, we potentially have those two options to make the diagnosis here. So I think it's important to be thinking about that. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I'm feeling pretty good about the fascioliasis. I'm thinking the way we're going to clinch this diagnosis is with the serology or the antigen testing. I would not fault anyone if there was some antibiotics that were involved in this case until it was clarified whether or not there was also a pyogenic process.
Mhm.
All right, I am embarrassed me before the world.
No, you performed brilliantly.
Yeah, no, I think as mentioned earlier, this is a clear-cut case of fascioliasis caused here by Fasciola hepatica, as we've proven with serology. And I think, as many of our listeners and you clearly pointed out, the prolonged fever with eosinophilia normally points you toward helminthic infections. And when you combine this with the very specific CT findings of these track marks, then there is a very narrow differential diagnosis. Visceral larva migrants in the liver is not a common one that's macroscopic, where you actually see the track marks of the larva. That's not a common presentation. And so once we ruled out Toxocara and had this epidemiologic history of her exposures, we were pretty much left with fasciololiasis. Unfortunately, we don't have serology in Israel, and we don't have triclabendazole in Israel.
Mm.
So for these rare parasitic disease, in some countries, it's not easy to find a diagnostic or a treatment. And this poor patient actually spent about 2 months walking through the workup in other clinics and in a prolonged hospitalization in another hospital, where she actually undergone a liver biopsy, a CT guided liver biopsy, which, as we will see with migrating larvae, when you punch the larva tract, you get eosinophilic granuloma. You never hit the actual worm, because that's where the worm had been, but it's already eaten its way through the liver. So she's undergone a liver biopsy, and finally they were referred to our institute, which is the largest travel and tropical institute in Israel, where we made a clinical diagnosis, started nitazoxanide, that was mentioned here also, because that was what was available. And then 2 weeks later, we got the serology and the treatment. So it gives you a few hints, both of the clinical course and some challenges of these more rare parasitic disease in travelers treatment in smaller countries like Israel. But I think it's a nice demonstrative case.
I think it's a sort of like hats off to our emailers, right? All we did is discuss this on TWiP, and next thing you know, you've got, most of our people not only writing in with, we know what it is, but here's how you diagnose it, here's the treatment option. So maybe more people need to listen to TWiP, and then this this poor lady would have very, sooner. So so I don't know if you had a chance to look at the nitazoxanide. We have it kind of in our clinical appendix as an inferior treatment option, but I don't know if I've ever looked, closely at the comparison between the gold standard, just 2 doses of the triclabendazole and the nitazoxanide. So
Nitazoxanide treatment is based on one randomized control trial that was conducted a long time ago. I believe it was in Peru, 1 or 2 trials in Peru, but that was what was available in Israel. And so the patient's father found some veterinary triclabendazole on AliExpress and wanted to bring it. And we said, no, please wait for, approved human medicine, because she was really suffering for a long time.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, even here in the US, triclabendazole, we have to call the CDC and have them send it to us. It's not readily available.
So I have a question about raising sheep in Israel. Isn't there a lot of sheep herding in Israel?
Yes, quite a lot of sheep herding. Most of them receive good, are regulated and receive good veterinary treatment. And so,
okay.
So I'm not sure if they undergo deworming for. We'll have to ask a veterinarian and not a human doctor like myself. But I know when we look, for example, for a major public health problem like brucellosis, then these sheep are treated. However, we do see, as in many other regions in the Mediterranean, we do have a major epidemic of echinococcus, and we see all presentations of echinococcus, and this is a huge and major public health problem in Israel, wherever you have this combination of sheep and dogs, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Thank you.
I was wondering, because I had cheated in the diagnosis, I thought I'll do a little bit of homework, and I thought maybe I could could tell our listeners a little bit about fasciolosis in
Sure.
animals, if that was,
Yeah.
if you were interested. So I think just before I start, just a quick note on the naming actually of the infection. So in humans, we call it fascioliasis, but in animals, it's called fasciolosis. And that's a bit confusing, really. But it is the same pattern of naming of Leishmania infection, which is called Leishmaniasis in humans, but Leishmaniosis in animals. So very confusing. And unfortunately, kind of if you read the literature, it's not really consistently applied. But I just thought I'd bring that up because I noticed it in one of the emails. They did say fasciolosis and then later fascioliasis, and I thought I'd just clarify that. So actually, this is a really important parasite of ruminants. So one of the most important flukes of domestic ruminants worldwide, actually, and it causes liver fluke disease. It's also known, or sometimes it's called liver rot. And so it can range in severity in animals from being really devastating in sheep and alpacas and other camelids, but then it can also be subclinical, particularly in cattle. So I don't want to spend all evening talking about all kinds of animals, but we can see some common patterns. So maybe elaborate a little bit on the sheep. And in sheep, we classify the infection as acute, subacute, or chronic. So acute disease is associated with larval migration of large numbers of juveniles over a short period of time. And I was wondering, what do they mean with large numbers? And that's actually more than 2,000 metacercaria ingested. So that seems like quite, I don't know, you would almost see that on the watercress, wouldn't you? Oh, makes me shiver. But so this can actually result in sudden death because of hemorrhage caused by the migration of the parasite. So really, really quite
Wow.
dramatic. And then when we look at subacute affection, there's often a gradual loss of the body condition. And ill thrift is also noted. And I put that word in because I had to look that up. I liked it. It's a new to me term, and it's essentially ill thrift essentially means that an animal grows at a um, slower rate than expected, considering the food that it is given.
Hmm.
So animals with subacute disease, they often have pale mucosa, which is a sign of anemia. And so if you were to actually analyze a blood sample, you would be able to confirm that. And animals can die, but not as suddenly and quickly as in really high infections. And you would see at necropsy, we would then see quite many immature flukes, but maybe also some adult flukes in the biliary branches. So chronic infection then is the most common manifestation, and I can build up over long periods of time. And it's generally the result of eating smaller numbers, like 2 to 500 metacercaria over a long period of time. And so there's a progressive loss of condition. That's quite typical. And then again, we have anemia, which can be severe. Death is not uncommon, but more
Hmm.
common in use during the late stages of pregnancy. But most of the sheep really present with ill thrift. I do like that word. If the fluke burden is quite low, and then we also have the pale mucosa that you can see. And in chronic infection, you will actually be able to detect eggs in the feces if you were looking for it. And the sheep actually not develop resistance, and so they can be reinfected even if you treat them. And cattle, they have more chronic liver disease, and camelids actually are really quite badly affected. And that's a big problem because fascioliasis and fasciolosis is really quite prevalent in South American countries where, people maybe, where people farm camelids such as alpacas and llamas. So they're important farm animals. Diagnosis is very similar, depends on the kind of setting and the size of the herd. So I'm not going to go into that. But actually, the prevalence varies considerably. So looked up a couple of studies. So in Nigeria, for example, in a study of an abattoir, they found a prevalence of 35% in goat, 39% in sheep, and 46% in cattle.
Mm.
And that's really high. And what they did there was they analysed fecal material from the rectum and also from the bile of slaughtered animals. That's really high. And then in a study in Northern Ireland, they found a prevalence of about 21 to 25% in cattle. I've moved on smoothly from sheep to cattle here mostly. So that's quite interesting. So I think what I'm trying to say really that liver fluke infection in commercial farming is, and probably also in non-commercial herds, is a really big global problem, and one that causes quite a lot of animal suffering and economic losses. And just just to round this up, the kind of economic consequences are actually difficult to measure, but you will have losses that arise from the death, but also you lose money because you have to treat infected animals, or you have to spend money to prevent prevention measures, and then the animals will be less productive in terms of meat, but also milk, and then obviously you wouldn't be able to use the livers at slaughter. So yeah, I thought so that that can be really quite significant loss of income, and I think particularly for subsistent farmers maybe that only have a small number of animals and really rely on that can be absolutely traumatic. And then the treatment the treatment is actually the same. Eyal already mentioned veterinary triclobendazole, so that's really the most commonly used drug, the drug of choice for sheep and cattle. But control and prevention is essentially based on treatment and also pasture management. Um, and really, ideally, you'd be able to do both. But for example, pasture management that would include, kind of draining wet pasture so that there wouldn't be any snails. You'd also be able, hopefully, exclude animals from snail-infested pastures, but that's really, not always easy. And in practice, treatment is really the most common measure that is taken. There used to be molluscicides that you could use, but that is actually banned in most countries now because it has a negative impact on the environment. And yeah, so and then the last thing I want to say, actually, resistance is actually an issue already in animal hepatica, fasciola hepatica infection. And and I'm sure that, it's maybe relating to the fact that traditionally a herd is just treated with triclobendazole, whether or not the animal is infected. So that probably contributes to that. So yeah, that's a very brief overview of animal infection, because sometimes we forget that the same parasites that infect us also infect animals. And yeah, so I hope you enjoyed that. And hope,
I
yeah.
would say thank you, Christina. It's a great example of a One Health public health topic where animals serve as reservoirs or vectors, and there's close contact between human and animals living in the same place or eating the same food as in this case. Means that if you want to control human infections, you really have to treat animals.
Mm. And actually, what I also read, and that's probably a minor detail, but when you treat an animal, there's then a long withdrawal period before you can send an animal to slaughter, if it's a meat-producing animal, or before you can actually then use the milk again or sell the milk again um, after treatment. So quite a long withdrawal period. So you treat your animal, but then you have to wait for ages before you can sell it on or milk.
Interesting. Did they say why you have to wait?
No, they did not actually. So
I'll have to look it up.
I don't actually know what the what I didn't look up the pharmacokinetics of triclobendazole. That would have been punishing. So I don't I can't answer that, I'm afraid.
I think for other trematodes, if you eat fresh liver, uncooked liver, you may develop some reactions. There's a Mediterranean reaction from eating fresh liver infected with flukes. But
Do you know the term halzoon?
I've read about it. I've never seen it in Israel. I think it's best described in Lebanon.
That's right. Exactly.
And I'm not sure it's associated with fasciola. I've seen reports on another parasite another trematode. I'm lapsing on its name. But your last TWiP, you mentioned ant infected worms, and this trematode actually has ants in its life cycle. But I'm just lapsing on the name of the parasite.
I've always thought about it as a fasciolopsis. Slash fasciolopsis infection. But again, more rumor than actual scientific fact. I'd like to see some more evidence of that in the literature.
I think Fasciolopsis does not have ants in the life cycle. I don't know. Did I miss something?
Well, they live in the liver.
No, but it's just because Eyal mentioned ants. So
If
I
you
was
eat,
just.
if
No,
you
it's
eat
not fasciola.
Oh,
I
right.
think
Okay.
Yeah,
halzoon is caused by
yeah,
exactly.
or dicrocilium.
Okay, yeah,
Dicrocilium
Dicrocilium
dendriticum.
yes, okay.
Yeah, so goat liver.
Yeah, I do know that one.
But if you drink a really strong bit of alcohol before the raw goat liver, it is not helpful.
That's right.
To reinforce that. Spiked.
Do you know how I mentioned that prevalence in animals can be quite high, kind of, 50%. In other places, it goes up to 60 or more. But actually, in people, it's thankfully not quite as low. So I did find a meta-analysis, a systematic meta-analysis where they kind of looked through hundreds of papers where they were discussing the epidemiology. And actually, they found a global prevalence of 4.6%. And then in South America, it's highest at 9%, followed by Africa, 4.8%, and Asia, 2%. And they didn't give any numbers for Europe. And actually, the highest prevalence in humans found in Bolivia at 21%. So that is actually really high, but not as high as I suppose in sheep and cattle. So.
Well, I think that probably reflects the fact that in most places people don't eat watercress raw, and maybe that's why, even though the sheep have it, the sheep herder doesn't.
Mm.
I mean, you have to
Yeah.
eat the same food, right?
Yeah,
You have to
yeah,
eat the same
yeah,
food.
do it, yeah.
Yep.
Although the watercress and egg sandwich is very popular
I
in
know,
Britain.
I know.
Although, with probably commercially raised watercress, so not
And
really
in Ireland
problematic.
too. That's right.
But it would still give me the shivers. I don't eat them.
No, I like going out and eating with Daniel because all I have to do is I'll have what he is having.
Deep fried meat.
Deep fried meat and
What was the other thing?
I think
cooked vegetables.
what is it? A single malt is usually just, for really
That's
the
right.
medicinal side of
That's the
things.
one. That is the one.
All right. So do we have a hero? I saw
We
a
do.
hero.
Wait, we have to give away a book first, though.
Oh, okay. Vincent, do we have any books?
That's what I was going to ask. Do we have any left?
We do have books, and we can
That's good.
give them away. So we had, I think, 6. What did I label here? 6 eligible guessers. So let's get a random number between 1 and 6. That would be number 3. Our winner is Margaret. Margaret.
I'll be darned.
Winner. So Margaret. Send your address to TWiP at microbe.tv. And if you're you're in the Willamette Valley, so you are in the U.S. Excellent. So we don't need your phone number. Send the address to TWiP at microbe.tv, and you will have a copy of Parasitic Diseases autographed by the authors.
There you go.
Daniel, do we have a new case this
Wait,
week?
we've got a
I thought
hero.
we had a hero. I think we have the
We do have a hero.
Voldemort of
Oh, we have a hero.
parasites.
We have
Dixon,
a hero.
who's your hero?
My hero is Terry Taylor. Terry Taylor is a pediatric physician, and I will give you her background in a moment. But Terry and I met a long, long time ago because she served on the council for ASTM&H, and so did I. And I was absolutely taken by her demeanor. She is probably the world's greatest pediatrician. She has a wonderful, easy, approachable style of dealing with intractable problems. And she is very active in childhood malaria problems in East Africa. And she's a university distinguished professor of tropical medicine at Michigan State University. She has a bachelor's and a doctor of osteopathy that she got, and I'll read you her background because she's received numerous awards. And the title underneath all these pictures was an article written in the Michigan State Literature. Terry Taylor's battle against malaria, which she refers to as Voldemort of parasites, has been waged since 1986. An internationally recognized scientist and physician, Terry spends 6 months of the year in African nation of Malawi, conducting malaria research and treating patients, the vast majority of whom are children. The Blantyre Malaria Project, established by Terry and Malcolm Molyneux, has carried out outstanding research in patient care in the area of pediatric malaria, specifically cerebral malaria, a syndrome in which the brain is involved and caused by Plasmodium falciparum, as you all probably know. With the help of Drs. James Pochin from Michigan State Department of Radiology and General Electric Healthcare, her first magnetic resonance imaging unit in Malawi was brought to the hospital. The MRI has been invaluable for treating patients and conducting research. She and her team have saved countless lives. And then I will read some of the honors that she has received over her lifespan. She's still with us, so there's more awards to come, I am certain. The first one, of course, she graduated from Swarthmore College in 1977. No, it's the very difficult small school to graduate from. They have very high standards, and she graduated Phi Beta Kappa. She also graduated at the top in her class at Sigma Sigma Xi, which is the highest level of recognition at the Chicago College of Osteopathic Medicine in 1981. She was an honorary lecturer at the Department of Tropical Medicine and Infectious Diseases in Liverpool. She received a Young Investigator Award from the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene in 1987. She was an International Health Awardee from Michigan State University in 2000. She won the Bailey K. Ashford Medal at the American Society for Tropical Medicine and Hygiene in the year 2000 as well. And then she was promoted to University Distinguished Professor at Michigan State University in 2003. She continues to astound people with the breakthroughs that she's actually made in diagnosing and treating and managing patients suffering from cerebral malaria. And like I said, she's probably one of the easiest persons you'll ever get to know. If you meet her, you will want to sit down and talk with her and find out, what she thinks about things, because she gives you the impression that she knows a lot about a lot of things, and she certainly does. I've always enjoyed my encounters with her, and so she's obviously high on my list, and I'm sorry that I've neglected to put her on my hero list until just now, but I'm happy to do so as we speak.
No, I'm glad you put her on. She's quite a figure, right? She spends, I think, most of her time, about half of her time, in Malawi. I think she was
Yep.
involved in getting the first MRI into the country. And I think, like many of us, her formal training was internal medicine. But, a lot of times when you end up overseas, you sort of become almost de facto a pediatrician taking care of a lot of the children, just because,
right.
that's really, as we've talked about, I think last time, that's where we're seeing a lot of these deaths, the under 5 years of age. So,
Yep.
Thank you, Dixon.
Welcome.
Okay, Daniel, New case.
Oh, I'm all out. No.
No.
So actually, this was a case that I just saw recently, and by recently, as in Tuesday. So,
That's recent.
and just to sort of say, we still see these cases on a regular enough basis. So this woman in her 40s is referred to me to be seen in the office from one of my colleagues. And this woman comes in. It's, basically I get a text about 10 o'clock at night, and I say, sure, just have her call the office. I'll see her tomorrow. I'll come in early. We'll make this happen. So I see this woman in the office, and she, as we start the conversation, just to give some context, she actually just starts crying. She's just very distraught. So she reports that she's been having recurrent issues with worms exiting her anus and her vagina since 2018. She reports that she lives with her husband and 4 children, and none of them have ever had any issues. She reports that initially, back in 2018, she took something over the counter and things resolved. She then, a couple years later, had this problem again, and this time discussed the problem with her housekeeper from El Salvador, who gave her an anti-parasitic tablet from her home country, and actually it explains that back in her home country, El Salvador, that the people there periodically deworm themselves every 3 to 6 months. She was initially referred by her primary care doctor to a GI doc who, when she explained, the GI doc actually laughed at her and suggested that she be referred to a psychiatrist. So as mentioned, she came in now very, very upset, very tearful. And she relates that she has this itching that wakes her up at night, and tells me that she's been able to take photos, as well as she has a video that she wants to share with me. So she goes ahead and she shows me the photos, and then she actually shows me a short video. And on this video, there is a thin white 1 centimeter motile thing. It's actually sort of moving. And one of the ends comes to a really sharp point. So sort of about this 1 centimeter white thread-like creature. She reports a non-restrictive diet. She reports no travel outside the U.S. or even outside the local area. There's no past medical history, no past surgical history. There is a family history with several different cancers. She does not work outside the home, but with 4 children, she works quite a lot inside the home. She reports no pets. She has an unremarkable exam and rather extensive lab work, HIV negative, just because I know Vincent's listening. The labs are only notable for a low vitamin D. So before I sent her off to the psychiatrist, what do I think and what do I do?
Treat her.
Okay, don't guess yet. We got to leave
Dixon,
this
I
for
mean, Daniel, you saw a photograph and a video of this modal
I actually
thing,
watched
right?
I watched this video. Yeah, actually,
So
it was
this is
very high
real.
quality.
This
Yeah.
is real, correct?
I have several videos similar to
Yeah.
what's described.
Yeah.
Oh,
These are
okay.
not
So
uncommon.
no, this is and I think that's important for our listeners. Like this woman actually has some really good high resolution photographs, and I think the video for me is the most impressive because this object actually is motile. It's actually kind of wiggling a little bit there.
1 centimeter. Okay. All right. Anything else,
anyone
folks?
need any more information? I felt like this is all I needed to know. I was like,
You've told
I
us
know
too
what we need to
much.
do next.
Before we wrap this up, I just want to read a short letter from David Waring from the Central Lancashire Parasitology Club. We sent them some books they won a long time ago. Books. And he wrote, "Dear Vincent, thank you so much for the books. We are delighted to receive them and put them to good use trying to solve TWiP 227. I've attached a picture of the current team clutching the precious volumes and a lovely bunch of people there. We are proud to participate in your wonderful show. We appreciate the support you have given by providing extra books too. Best wishes, David." Everybody seems happy holding a book.
It looks like we're a couple of books short, though.
Yeah, but
Seem to
anybody,
be 2 books short.
I just want to make a
Right? You
comment
got 6
here.
people in the picture and only $4.
I'm going to make a
Yep.
comment here, and you're going to have to agree with me now. People love accessing information on the internet. They love using their computers, but they also love books. Just remember that. And you're looking at 4 very grateful people who, when they can't plug in their computer or they don't want to, and they want to travel with this information, they take their book.
Dixon, people like getting gifts too.
And they earned it. This was not a
I
gift.
bet you, Vince,
They
I bet you,
earned it.
Dixon, if we sent them each a computer with the digital version, we'd see big smiles too. Just
Yeah,
saying.
that's
You don't have to do that. They've got a computer. They've already got the computer.
right.
They've all got a computer. That's how they go to school.
All
They
right.
still like the books.
That is, the book is easy to access. It's true. You turn pages. All right, that's TWiP 229. So you have a month to solve this, because in 2 weeks we'll have a paper TWiP, and then in 2 more weeks, a month from today. So do the counting. You have a month to solve this case. And today is February 9th. So it's not a month from when you hear this. It's a month from February 9th. Show notes, microbe.tv/TWiP. You can send your guesses, twip@microbe.tv. And as I said, if you like our work, please consider supporting us, microbe.tv/contribute. Daniel Griffin is at Columbia University Medical Center, parasiteswithoutborders.com. Thank you, Daniel.
My pleasure. And get those guesses in by March 1st.
March
Exactly
1st.
right.
Thank you very much. Dixon DePalmier, Trichinella.org, thelivingriver.org. Thank you, Dixon.
Welcome, Vincent. Always a good time, as Richard would say, but I'd say it too.
Christina Nowell is at the University of Glasgow. Thank you, Christina.
Well, thank you. That was a really fun episode.
Our guest today from Tel Aviv University in Israel, Eyal Leshem. Thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you very much for having me again.
Eyal, I have to interject here. I must send you my deepest sympathies for what's going on where you're living right now. And everybody is suffering greatly for it. And everybody here wishes it would just stop. But we know that's not going to happen right away. But just know that we all empathize and sympathize.
Thank you for that.
I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at microbe.tv. I'd like to thank the American Society for Microbiology for their support of TWiP and Ronald Jenkins for the music. You've been listening to This Week in Parasitism. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon. Eyal, take it away.
And another TWiP is parasitic.
Right.
Get going.